Hello, and welcome back to Realm News, your place for all your Minecraft needs, where I put the real in Realm and expand your mind one block at a time. I am your host, the Dark Lord. How have you all been? Enjoying the spring weather, folks? I really hope you are. It's been hit and miss here. Rainy, super hot, chilly, weird. It's all over the place here in Kansas. Anyways, today I'm going to be presenting to you an extremely fascinating history to the direct predecessor to Minecraft. I am talking about RubyDung. I know a lot of people out there are probably saying it was the cave game test. Let's say the game that inspired the cave game test. And to me, the cave game test was Minecraft. It was just without the name Minecraft. Anyways, an old creation. This was an old creation of, by Marcus Persson. This is what led to Minecraft. It helped. In fact, Minecraft's source code, or the cave game, according to Wikipedia, was loosely based off RubyDung's source code. He borrowed parts of it and carried that into Minecraft, which I find to be extremely fascinating. If you have been following the show, then you would know that I love digging into the history of Minecraft. I've covered the legend of Chambered, which I argued indirectly helped shape Minecraft as well. Now, we are on to RubyDung, the game that evolved into Minecraft. Let's find out more right now, if you're all ready. I mean, are you ready for this, folks? Because this was some crazy history, okay? So, whenever you're ready, sit back, relax, let's enjoy the show. Before we dive into the intricacies of RubyDung, Minecraft's predecessor, it's worth noting the evolution that led to its creation. RubyDung wasn't the sole product of this evolution. Rather, it was part of a series of Ruby, quote-unquote, designs that preceded it. Here's my understanding of the order of Ruby's evolution, although it's important to emphasize that much of this information is undocumented and the timeline is quite uncertain. However, I did an extensive amount of research on this, and I have all my work citations listed out for you to verify in the show description. Just check it out underneath the work side. Of course, I am prone to making errors, but I think this is how I explain. This is just how I explain the timeline today, is how the Ruby engine evolved into eventually what would be known as the cave game test, which directly became Minecraft. Take that all as a grain of salt. Here is the list of Ruby iterations, how I see it. First, it started off as Ruby, the prototype engine, and then it progressed into Rubylands X as his next iteration in the Ruby series. After Rubylands X, he moved on to Rubyland. After Rubyland, he then created RubyDung, or he was in the process of creating. It was, I believe, unfinished. Well, I'm quite certain it was unfinished. And there were a series of games that inspired these iterations that I will be diving into briefly today as well. But let's begin with the beginning of the Ruby concept. It all started with a prototype, quote-unquote, free-scrolling JRPG engine, simply called Ruby. By the way, a JRPG stands for Japanese role-playing game. A good example of this would be Final Fantasy. Also, before I go any further, I need to say that this was one of the harder, or maybe the hardest episodes that I ever had to research. Why? Well, because we honestly do not know much about RubyDung or its predecessors. The info that is to be found is scattered all over the internet. The wiki is pretty decent, but it doesn't explain much. I pretty much had to sort this out by myself to understand it. One reason why it was confusing was because Notch, according to imgur.com or imgur.com, said this, quote, I tend to use the name, quote-unquote, Rubylands as a placeholder for almost all my RPGs, hoping it'll stick to one of them, end quote. And the earliest versions of Minecraft are labeled with a quote-unquote RD, a capital RD, which stands for, well, you guessed it, RubyDung. Because, again, the cave game tests that directly became Minecraft had parts of RubyDung's source code, and so he decided to use RD as the file name for those very beginning. This is very beginning of Minecraft. It's insane to learn that, to me. Anyways, I thought it was so fascinating. Anyways, back to the game engine prototype he developed called Ruby. According to Minecraft.wiki, Ruby was a game, quote, with monster battles in which players could select options in the menu and attack monsters, complete with animations and damage pop-ups, end quote. I dug deep into the internet and came across some original posts Notch made in regards to his creation, Ruby, which the original post title is called Rubylands. Remember, he used it as a placeholder for much of his stuff. On JVM-gaming.org, he was posting his very early alpha version of Rubylands in order to receive motivation to keep developing it. All the messages posted there were made in February 2008. Here's a quote from Notch responding to someone on the forum. Quote, hee hee, yeah, it's insanely hugely alpha, but I figured mentioning it in a few select places would encourage me to actually work on it. I've got the basic structure in place with JSP, MySQL, and CSS, end quote. He went on to explain exactly what the game Ruby was going to be like. Quote, it's going to be a fantasy group manager. You don't actually do any quests yourself, but rather assemble, equip, and level up heroes who need to get paid and send them on quests you've gotten from the local town. When they return, you get to see a replay of how the quest went down and get to distribute/sell/equip any loot gathered. So, it's a bit like those neat football manager games, except for fantasy. The player plays the role of some leader and also has experience points himself, letting the actual player level up to support bigger groups, better headquarters, and perhaps even several simultaneous groups. End quote. It is extremely interesting for me to hear that the predecessor to Minecraft started off as a free scrolling game. That it just kind of blows my mind here. I love hearing the evolution of it. It's just so intriguing. Okay, moving on. You were witnessing it from, I should say free scrolling game. You're witnessing it from the side view or horizontally if you've ever played those games. If you've ever played Rampage, that's a really good side scroller that's fun to play. I don't know if you are familiar with that audience, but that's a good example of one. Anyways, that's just the only one that pops off the top of my head. There's really not much to know about Ruby, though. I should go ahead and say that just right now. There's just, like I said, scraps out there, bits and pieces of it, of information on the internet over Ruby. That's all I could pretty much find. That's all I have on the prototype engine. However, it never really truly died, Ruby. It just kept evolving, which leads me to the next iteration called Rubylands X. Minecraft.wiki sums up Rubylands X as this, quote, a tile-based roguelike with line of sight and fancy lighting effects, a fireball spell, and exploding barrel chain reactions, end quote. It is considered a top-down style game, which is exactly how it sounds, meaning that when you are playing, your perspective is looking over the world in which your character inhabits. It's like Toe Jam and Earl, if you ever played that video game from the 90s, or similar to SimCity as you look upon your city that you've created, or if you've ever played that game. I'm just throwing out some examples, folks. That's what just pops out of my head, some games I played as growing up as a kid. It's also called a roguelike game. I wanted to look this definition up for you just because I never heard of it before until researching this, and I figured some of you out there didn't know what roguelike was either. But according to Wikipedia, it means, quote, roguelike, It is a style of role-playing game traditionally characterized by a dungeon crawl through procedurally generated levels, turn-based gameplay, grid-based movement, and permanent death of the player character. Most roguelikes are based on a high fantasy narrative, reflecting the influence of tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. End quote. The 1980 game titled Rogue is considered to be the first kind of game to take on these attributes, hence the term roguelike. It kind of makes sense. I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't know what roguelike meant while doing the research on this, so I thought you would all like to know. Now, let's move on to Rubyland. I don't have anything else for Rubyland X, folks. There's like nothing out there over it. So let's move on to the next. We are in Rubylands now, and Rubylands was the direct predecessor to RubyDung. The Minecraft.wiki article posits that code from Rubylands was used for RubyDung, which is funny because the source code of RubyDung, or parts of it I should say, were used for the cave game test or Minecraft. In fact, the cobblestone and grass blocks were taken from RubyDung and put into Minecraft. Anyways, back to Rubyland, folks. This was also an unreleased project like all the Ruby projects, I just want to say. Minecraft.wiki tells us a bit about this project. Quote, this was going to be a group manager where players would assemble, equip, level up, and pay heroes. End quote. Supposedly, a town in the game would provide you with quests. Again, sounds really familiar, right? I think, Ruby, the prototype. And it was up to you to send your heroes off and carry out these quests as you wait their return. And then the mission, you would be shown their action again, and then you'd receive loot, if any, and you could sell it, distribute, or equip it. You'd also gain experience points to level up in the process, and you wanted to level up because this would determine the size of your group and the number of groups you could have. Also, you could add onto your base the more levels you earned, which you could make. People love this. The game was designed for you to hire, fire, and have your heroes fight. However, the only known creatures in this game are a bunny and a hero, which is funny. The hero is named Ganute. I had to actually do some research to find the name of that because you won't find the name on the wiki. So that's new information, wiki. I should probably go in there and change it. However, yeah, Ganute. That's the name of the hero in this. And the only reason we know this is because Notch shared it with the world on a forum called JGO back in February 2008. He posted this. It's a little bit of a long post, but bear with me. I feel like it was necessary to read. Quote, and now you can fight enemies and fire heroes and hire new ones. The replay isn't animated yet, though, and the fighting is still very simplistic, but at least it's progress. Then it goes, quote, Bunny attacks Ganute, but misses. Bunny attacks Ganute for 4 damage. Bunny attacks Ganute for 5 damage. Mab attacks Bunny but misses. Bunny attacks Ganute for 9 damage. Bunny attacks Ganute but misses. Mab attacks Bunny but misses. Mab attacks Bunny but misses again. Ganute attacks Bunny but misses. Bunny attacks Ganute for 6 damage. Bunny attacks Ganute for 8 damage. Ganute dies. Mab attacks Bunny for 11 damage. Bunny dies. Heroes win the battle. Mab gains 15 XP. Heroes win. Quote, end quote, folks. And my apologies. Something has occurred to me. Ganute wasn't the only hero listed in this that wasn't listed in the wiki. I thought this was a misspelling, but it's Ganute. Then there's, I guess, Nat, or maybe it's Gnat. It's spelled Gnat. I thought maybe he had misspelled it, but no, the Gnat's mentioned so many times, so he took a lot of attack damage. And then there's another one, Mab. So there's Ganute in here, Gnat, and then Mab. 3 heroes attacking a bunny. Must have been a tough bunny. Interesting. I just now noticed that reading this, folks. So I thought there was only the one hero, so that's interesting. There's 3 heroes listed that we know in the history. Anyways, it's a very nerdy, goofy post that was describing an entire battle sequence. We have no clue if there were any other sprites made for Rubylands besides Ganute, Mab, and Gnat, and the bunny, of course. And why did he make the bunny evil? Why make the enemy? Why make that the enemy, Notch? Please come onto the show and answer these questions for me. I'd love that, and the audience would too. I'm happy that the internet has these Notch blog posts, folks, these forum posts, and many other posts preserved of his, such as this post found at web.archive.org. It is a post made by Notch at 6:18 PDT or Pacific time on Wednesday, March 26, 2008. It has a title called News, along with a subtitle under it titled Items. It is a somewhat detailed plan on the game systems he was planning on implementing into Rubylands. I find this list that I'm about to read off to you to be utterly interesting and very important because I believe these systems he put in place or planned to put in place within Rubylands may have directly influenced Minecraft or lent a hand in his thought process and what to do with Minecraft. Allow me to read you this post of game systems. Quote, here's the current plan for items. And then there's a list here. It goes normal items, and underneath that, stackable, can't be equipped, only carried, single use, also used for random collectibles and materials. Then he provides an example. The example is healing potion, crossbow bolt, and dragon hide. Next, multi-use items. Underneath that is, he has in the multi-use items group, not stackable, can't be equipped, only carried. Technically the same as normal items, except rendered as single items. Used for wands and things with more than a single use. Example, wand of healing. And then hot meal. Next, he has equipables, and in this group, not stackable, consists of an item type, a material, an optional prefix, and an optional suffix. The item type decides what slot the item can be equipped in. Materials range from normal ones, iron, wood, etc., to exotic ones that require hero traits to use, glass, dragon scale, etc. Prefixes are single adjectives, legendary, blessed, fine, and modify the item stats. Suffixes are in the form of foo and add special abilities to the item. Example, iron boots, legendary silver necklace of gloom, decorated wool cape, copper sword of dragon slain. And that's all he had in this list, folks. Some of those items listed in the examples under the game systems were very intriguing to me. So let's just go over one more time. We have the normal items, which was healing potion, crossbow bolt, dragon hide. Multi-use items, which were wand of healing and hot meal. Then he has equipables, which are iron boots, legendary silver necklace of gloom, decorated wool cape, copper sword of dragon slain. Intriguing. Whatever happened to these interesting items, and why didn't they come into Minecraft? Such as the legendary silver necklace of gloom or the dragon hide. What about the copper sword of dragon slain? What the heck? Those all would have been amazing. Perhaps they'll come in a future drop. Who knows? I personally would love to see necklaces and rings that have special enchantments to them. I just think that would be fun to interact with. Anyways, that's all I have on Rubylands, folks. I would like to now move on to the topic of the show. What all led up to it is RubyDung. Let's move on to some RubyDung. According to Minecraft.wiki, quote, RubyDung was an unreleased strategy sandbox game, end quote. And what an odd name, RubyDung. At first it sounds like some sort of Ruby intermingled with fecal matter, but Notch actually had a reason for naming it that, even if it doesn't have a nice ring to the name. Ruby for Rubyland and Dung for Dungeons. If you remember my episode over an even earlier game that Notch developed called Legend of Chambered, then you would already understand that he had a penchant for dungeons and dungeon crawler video games. I think that influenced the dung or dungeon part of the name in RubyDung. That's just my personal hypothesis. Let me know what you think by writing in at bio.link/realmnews. According to Minecraft.wiki, Marcus Persson, aka Notch, had worked on RubyDung only for 4 months at the most. Quote, February 2009 or earlier until May 2009 at the latest, end quote. The wiki says that there is not much known about this long-lost game except for that it was inspired by another game called Dwarf Fortress. For those of you who do not know what Dwarf Fortress is, allow me to shed some light on it. According to Wikipedia.com, quote, Dwarf Fortress, previously titled Slaves of Armok, God of Blood, Chapter 2, Dwarf Fortress, is a construction and management simulation and roguelike indie video game created by Bay 12 Games, available as freeware and in development since 2002. Its first alpha version was released in 2006 and received attention for being a two-member project surviving solely on donations, end quote. The game is truly fascinating and it deserves its own episode, but that's for a different podcast. However, allow me to explain a little more about this game, just because I think it's important to understand it better and just in order to see why Notch was drawn to it to begin with and how it potentially influences his decision-making when it came to designing his own games. Dwarf Fortress had 3 modes that you could play in. Fortress mode, which is a sandbox-style game where players manage a dwarven colony. Then there was Adventure mode, which is a roguelike where players control an adventure. And then there was Legends mode, which allows players to view the game world's history and achievements. Dwarf Fortress was designed in something called ASCII, or American Standard Code for Information Interchange. ASCII could also have its own episode in itself, but again, that's for another podcast altogether, and I will not be diving into that history today. I just thought it was worth mentioning just to better understand that game. Now, moving on, I found a very intriguing blog post made by Notch himself directly talking about RubyDung that I would like to read off to you. It is found at web.archive.org titled The Origins of Minecraft, and it was published on October 30th, 2009. Quote, while looking through some project folders, I found an old prototype of a game that never quite became anything. Kinda. It was called RubyDung for various reasons, and was supposed to be base building game inspired by Dwarf Fortress, but with a heavy focus on accessibility, end quote. He then went on to say, quote, around this time, I was also playing around with the idea of making a zombie game with a graphics engine similar to GTA Chinatown Wars. I made my own fully 3D texture mapper from scratch for the first time in my life. I had only one 2.5D texture mapper up until this point. The idea was kind of vaguely to make a spiritual sequel to Left 4 Dead. It looked a little something like this, and he provided a YouTube link. As a RubyDung engine got more advanced, I started thinking about adding a first-person view for following your minions around, kind of like in Dungeon Keeper. It worked okay, but the graphics got very pixelated and distorted, so I left it out, end quote. I found this blog entry to be extremely fascinating. In this one entry, we hear that he is directly influenced by 4 video games. Dwarf Fortress, which I already mentioned, but I'll say again, is a construction and management simulation and roguelike indie video game, which was created by Bay 12s. Then he mentioned GTA Chinatown Wars, which is a 2009 action-adventure game developed by Rockstar Leeds in conjunction with Rockstar North and published by Rockstar Games. Then there was Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead was another zombie game that he was inspired by, But Notch actually made a game that was called Left 4K Dead that was directly inspired by that too. Anyways, and then he mentioned Dungeon Keeper, which is a strategy video game developed by Bullfrog Productions and released by Electronic Arts in June 1997 for MS-DOS and Windows 95. I just thought it was fascinating that he took elements from the video games he loved and put them into RubyDung. And then RubyDung's source code was used to create Minecraft. I shouldn't be shocked because that's how everything's made. We borrow and take ideas from experiences we see, hear, feel, touch, and taste. Heck, I remember my brother asked me on Realm News, first anniversary episode, he asked me directly what influences my show. And I said back to him very bluntly, everything. My show is shaped by all my life experiences. So I always enjoy reading the thoughts of the creator. The evolution of Minecraft was much deeper than I could have ever fathomed. And from that last post Notch made, you can tell that he was clearly leveling up his coding abilities by jumping from 2.5D to 3D. His original goal was to make a more easy to play version of Dwarf Fortress by adding a 3D isometric perspective. In layman terms, an example of 3D isometric perspective would be, imagine a plain cardboard box, right? That would be your 3D object. And then let's say you print out a picture of bricks on paper. Picture of bricks on paper. And that's your texture. Then you glue the paper onto the box. Now the box looks like a brick cube instead of a plain cardboard box. There you go. That's an example of 3D isometric perspective in layman terms. That's just a basic way of describing the process. However, the texture mapper and RubyDung for grass and cobblestone were randomly colored. And the terrain in RubyDung consisted of a lot of slopes with bumps and monoliths. He used billboard sprites for the trees, which covered the landscape. There were also a lot of dirt paths. A fun fact is that two of the first blocks, grass and cobblestone's textures, were directly taken out of the later dated screenshots of RubyDung that you can find and put into the earliest version of Minecraft. In fact, I posted these examples on Realm News' Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky. I recommend going to check them out. The link will be provided in the show description. Before we wrap up this week, I have another video game that helped push Notch to the next step in his RubyDung development. It is a game called Infiniminer, and it helped influence his making of the cave game test, which became Minecraft. Let's take a look at it. I have never heard of Infiniminer before starting this podcast. Well, according to Minecraft.wiki, quote, Infiniminer is an open-source multiplayer block-based sandbox building and digging game, inspired by the games Infinifrag, Team Fortress 2, and Motherlode, in which the player plays as a miner searching for minerals by carving tunnels through procedurally generated block-based maps and building structures, end quote. Sounds kind of familiar. Kind of like, Minecraft? Let's keep going. The wiki goes on to say, quote, Infiniminer was originally intended to be played as a team-based competitive game, where the goal is to locate and excavate precious materials such as gold and diamonds, and bring the findings to the surface to earn points for one's team, until the winning team reaches a certain amount of points. However, as the game gained popularity, many players decided it was much more fun to build things than to compete for points, end quote. Very intriguing. I love how people ditched the competitiveness and went ahead and turned it into more of a sandbox game by constructing things. The team-based aspect of the game was set up into two teams, red team, blue team, and the blocks in the world were composed of the team's colors, which Notch found to be aesthetically ugly. He also didn't think the game had enough variation, so he went ahead and started to create his own game engine. Thus, RubyDung was born, which that source code was used to create the cave game test, which became Minecraft. Unfortunately for Infiniminer, it released on April 29, 2009, but development effectively stopped about a month later after the source code was leaked online. The source code was leaked due to the lack of oversight from the developers who failed to obfuscate, that's a hard word for me to pronounce for all of a sudden, failed to obfuscate or scramble the code in a new release. Yeah, it's just a fancy word for scrambling code so people can't hack into it and distribute it or do whatever they want or just make their own version of the game. Sorry, I can't pronounce that word. Anyways, but with open source code out on the market, modders just went nuts over it. And I recommend it's destroyed. It just killed it for the people that created this. It just was out of their hands at that point, when the source code was leaked. I recommend clicking on Infiniminer link in the episode description and just go check out the pics there because it's utterly similar to Minecraft. It is strikingly similar to Minecraft. You can see the direct inspiration received by Notch and how it translated over into Minecraft. And it's interesting how Minecraft is just not something made from thin air. It's a true culmination of old Notch's coding abilities, the games that even inspired him, in sheer good old-fashioned trial and error. With that said, folks, that's really all I have for this week's episode of RubyDung. After today's episode, I must say that our beloved game of Minecraft has quite the history. One can go to Minecraft.wiki and see just how extensive the Minecraft universe truly is. It's outstanding to see how nuanced this game has become in all the articles, podcasts, books, YouTube videos, content creators, and other forms of entertainment built around it. Another aspect that amazes me as well is what came directly prior to Minecraft, what Notch created that led to its development, such as RubyDung. When I first set out to make this episode, I didn't realize that RubyDung in itself was an evolution, a series of trial and error. Many games help lead to the creation of RubyDung, thus the creation of Minecraft. It was a culmination of experiences that Notch stitched together, rendering the masterpiece we know as Minecraft today. The earliest versions of Minecraft still internally refer to themselves as RubyDung and still contain the terrain.png file from RubyDung, which dates to February 2009. Minecraft Java Edition included a version named RD, which stands for RubyDung as well. I think there is something rather important to all this. To me, I see everything as a learning experience, and I tend to apply my day-to-day life to this podcast. Even the most mundane, boring experience may come in handy one day on your personal journey of trial and error. I want to leave you with a question. Do you think Minecraft would have existed without Notch having experienced Dwarf Fortress, GTA China Wars, Dungeon Keeper, Left 4 Dead, Infiniminer, or all the other video games he played up to that moment? Personally, I think not. Let me know what you think by writing into bio.link/realm news. I hope you all enjoyed the brief history of RubyDung. That's really all I could get on it. It's about as elaborate as it gets, folks. It's one of the most extensive, if not the most extensive, podcast episodes made over this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully more stuff surfaces. Hopefully I can get Notch on the show and he can explain more about this, the history. I would love to talk to him about this. With that said, I wish you all a great rest of your day and week. And until next time, happy crafting. The Dark Lord. Signing out. Hey, Realm News fans, it's your host, the Dark Lord, the one who puts the real in Realm and expands your mind one block at a time. I am here to tell you that your support means everything. Spread the word by telling friends, liking, and commenting on Spotify or Good Pods. Find me on X, Blue Sky, Reddit, or via email at bio.link/realm news. For more content, join my Patreon at the Copper tier for early episodes, bonus content, and newsletters. Find out more at bio.link/realm news. No pressure, though. Just keep listening, liking, and sharing. That's more than enough. Happy crafting, and see you at the next Realm News.